This video is sponsored by Surfshark. More from them in a bit. You might call them soda or pop, cola, Coke, fizzy water, carbonated beverage, but I like the term soft drink. To be fair, most drinks are soft drinks because, well, to make it a hard drink, you have to have a lot of alcohol. Soft drinks tend to have fancy logos. Look at that. That's pretty fancy. Logos are just a way a company presents itself. This was all inspired by heraldry and coat of arms. It's a way to grab your attention really quickly, and these became a necessity in the age of consumerism. Yeah, back in the early 1800s, you didn't have 100 different kinds of bread to choose from when you went in the store. You just had bread made by the baker, and they didn't really need a logo for that. So today, I'm going to be talking about the history of soft drink logos. Seriously, that's what we're doing today. But before I get into all of that, Surfshark is a virtual private network that keeps your identity safe online from, well, lots of people. The internet is a scary place, and if you don't know what you're doing, you might be in for a world of trouble. Public Wi-Fi seems pretty cool, right? Hey, it's free, but guess what? It compromises you, makes you open to bad guys with computers who can steal your data. Companies are constantly trying to monitor everything you do. Don't let them watch what you're doing just so they can get their sick kicks. A VPN can swap your real location with a virtual one, allowing you to travel across the globe virtually with the click of a button. Not only is this an essential tool for privacy in the 21st century, but it also has some cool other benefits. Maybe you just want to watch stuff from places you ain't ever been before. With a VPN, this is possible. So make sure you secure your privacy today with Surfshark. Enter coupon code KNOWLEDGEHUSK for an extra 3 months for free using my link in the description. Let's go back to the 1800s. Imagine a world on the Wild West frontier, and you find a water hole. You quench your thirst by taking a sip from this, and you get dysentery. And you die. Nowadays, water ain't so bad. They have chemicals they put in it to make your teeth nice, to make you healthy, to make the frogs gay. But back in the 1800s, you know, there was a good chance if you drink some random water, you're gonna die. Point is, a lot of people decided it wasn't worth the risk, so they just start drinking alcohol because alcohol kills germs, right? And if you drink alcohol, that's safer than drinking random water. So everyone's drinking alcohol. Johnny Appleseed's going across the United States planting apple trees to make apple cider. Good time was had by all until guys started beating their wives. Look, if we're talking about a society in which everybody is drunk, from the children to the adults to the non-homosexual frogs, that is going to have some negative repercussions. The temperance movement popped up. Now, this would eventually lead to prohibition, but well before that, there were places that were trying to get rid of alcohol. The most popular soft drinks of today were born in the late 1800s during this time, and sold as sort of medicinal, but mostly non-alcoholic beverages. The first Pepsi logo was this. Brad's drink was created by a man whose name was not actually Brad. He was inspired by the creation of a prior soft drink called Coca-Cola. This was a drink created by an ex-Confederate soldier attempting to find a cure for his debilitating morphine addiction. The original version did actually have alcohol, but due to all this temperance laws and, just anti-alcohol sentiment, Coca-Cola was created as the non-alcoholic alternative. But it did have a special ingredient: cocaine. It wasn't too long until Brad's drink was remarketed as Pepsi Cola, with the pep being it gives you energy. Probably not as much energy as Coca-Cola. Scripts are like fonts for handwriting. It's a standardized way to write things. Think of writing cursive in school. That's a script. The Coca-Cola logo used something called a Spencerian script, which was pretty much the standard font for most formal things in the United States at the time. Now, all of these logos have unique twists on scripts, but this would be kind of the equivalent of taking Times New Roman and just making it a little wacky. What I'm trying to say is, while today this might look excessively ornate or fancy, at the time it would have been less so. As you can probably guess, the Coca-Cola logo doesn't change all that much throughout its history. Over time, it gets a little bit more simplistic, a little more refined, but for the most part, what we had back then, we still got today. However, there were a few exceptions. The first Coca-Cola logo was this. Now, come on, it's hard to really count this as a logo. It's just basic text from like a typewriter, but hey, you gotta start somewhere. But for 1 year, the Coca-Cola logo actually looked like this. I love this. It's more symmetrical. The C's are the same, the O's and the A's as well. Coca-Cola also had another logo that they only used for just a year, and it looked pretty good. These are a little weird, yeah, that's a little odd, but still. I saw somebody refer to this look as a musical notation style. After this point, we would start to see Coca-Cola embrace the Coca-Cola red, and after just a few logo variations, they would settle on something that's pretty close to what they still use today. Dr. Pepper's logo was very swoopy. Lots going on here. Dr. Pepper's color was established as red around the same time as Coca-Cola, but that wouldn't always be the case. Sometimes Dr. Pepper would be attached to this far more medicinal looking logo, which does not resemble the modern drink or any drink at all. This Pepsi Cola logo, it looks awful. You could give it points for creativity, as this doesn't seem to be resembling a standard script, but especially at a distance, this just comes off as scribbles. Like somebody scribbled down the words Pepsi Cola, and that was that. If you look closer, there is a lot more detail going on here. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't look good. I can't blame Brad for not having the best graphics design team that the 1890s could provide, but still, it would not be too long until Pepsi got a much cleaner take on this original logo. Same with Dr. Pepper. A lot of these very complex original designs would get simplified, more minimalistic. Foreshadowing. After all of this, Coca-Cola just kind of takes over the world. You did not have these great cola wars like you have today. There was no big Pepsi versus Coke because Pepsi was going bankrupt. Like twice, I think. And they went to Coke trying to get them to buy them out. And Coke refused. Coke refused to buy Pepsi. Pepsi wasn't doing so great. Until it was. They basically took their drink, doubled the size of the bottle, and sold it for the same price as Coke, which led to a huge influx in sales during the Great Depression. By the 40s, Pepsi was doing pretty good. America, though, they were at war. And Pepsi had a bold idea. People were feeling pretty patriotic around this time. So Pepsi figured, hey, what if we take the red, white, and blue of the American flag, boom, plop it right on our bottle caps. Just so people knew, you know, hey, Pepsi, they're with America. They heart America. Yeah, that's actually it. That is the reason why, even to this day, the Pepsi logo is red, white, and blue. Because this happened, and people liked it, and they never changed it. But this still wasn't enough to really compete with Coke. Look, Coca-Cola is one of, if not the most iconic brands in the world. This logo might be the most iconic logo in the world. And there's a reason for that. Coca-Cola is an institution. People have been drinking Coca-Cola since they were kids, and their parents like Coca-Cola, and their grandparents like Coca-Cola. Pepsi, while nearly as old as Coke, it feels like it's constantly changing, right? And that's intentional. And it starts right after World War II. In the post-war era, a new age of American consumerism, keeping up with the Joneses, the suburbs, the middle class, and everything in between, people started looking to the future, and logos began to reflect that. Companies like Dr. Pepper would change its logo to this embodiment of the atomic age. The old handwritten cursive scripts replaced with precision lines, sans serif. I really like the R on this one. Look at that, it's just a dot. Pepsi started leaning more into its red, white, and blue bottle cap color scheme. The actual bottle still looked like Pepsi Cola, but I guess the brand itself was using the bottle cap more in marketing. Pepsi was still no giant and had no clear direction to compete with Coke until a bizarre event in 1959. During an American exhibition in Moscow, the US was showing the Soviets all the best that the American dream had to offer. And at the time, Vice President Nixon met with Khrushchev to debate kitchen stuff. Amidst all of this, Khrushchev ended up drinking a Pepsi. A photographer snapped a photo, and Pepsi's fate was changed forever. Because now they had a direction, a marketing strategy that could compete with Coke. And that strategy was change. The Cold War averted with a cold beverage. Pepsi brought people together. Pepsi was about looking towards the future. Pepsi basically wanted to shift its marketing towards the young people, which at this time would have been the baby boomers. So how does this apply to logos? Well, coming into the 1960s, you might expect Pepsi to follow trends and pull out something like this, but they didn't. No, instead we got this. The bottle cap is flat now and integrated into the logo. Pepsi Cola written in pretty standard black text. It wasn't that forward thinking, but we can tell that Pepsi they were onto something. After 1965, this Pepsi logo started appearing at times, and wow, this font, this is a look that is way ahead of its time. This is a huge change. The lines on each letter are precise and straight. I mean, sure, it's not perfect. I think this bottle cap, some of these details are just a bit odd. This E, that bothers me. And the use of black text with red and blue and white just feels wrong. I feel like there's too much going on here. But still, this is good. Now let's contrast this with, say, Dr. Pepper's 1960s logo. During the 60s, we see Dr. Pepper move finally from this bright red to the burgundy that it's known for today. Look at that, that's good. And then they would change it just a little bit later. By the end of the decade, Pepsi does something special. They create what I think is probably one of, if not the best logos ever made. The bottle cap was changed into a globe. But look, this logo is straight up minimalism in the late 1960s. Was this unique to Pepsi? No, minimalism has been around for a long time, but for context, this is what the Mountain Dew logo was looking like at the time. Some of you might assume at this point that graphic design houses were starting to get computers leading to these flat designs, but that was not the case. Even into the 70s, you wouldn't see computers used commonly in creating these logos, but many new logos were designed to look as though they were created on computers, and many logos were recreated within computers. Dr. Pepper's logo during this time was, in my opinion, a bit too contemporary. Dr. Pepper has no consistency. Even by the 1970s, there is nothing about the Dr. Pepper logo that makes me say that is the Dr. Pepper logo. Moving back to bright red, again, does no favors to distinguish this from the competition. It wouldn't be too long until Pepsi got a redesign, and to be honest, I am mixed on this one. It is classic Pepsi, you've definitely seen it many times before. The big difference here is that the Pepsi logo is surrounded. It has a white circle on the edge with this blue and red combo on the sides. But what kind of bothers me is that it has three colors. You have red, you have dark blue, and light blue. Don't get me wrong, the alternative of just two colors would be way worse. Mountain Dew was getting its first major redesign, and yeah. If Pepsi was the brand looking to the future, and Dr. Pepper was just playing off of trends in the here and now, Mountain Dew was simply late to the party. Even by the 70s, this logo is very 60s. It's very organic, wavy. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but coupled with the Yahoo on the can, it just seems like a bit of a culture clash. Is this moonshine, or is this hippy dip? Coca-Cola was still doing the same thing they were always doing. There had been a few minor variations, but the only big change was the introduction of this white ribbon in the late 60s, which going forward would sometimes affect the lettering and sometimes it wouldn't. This all brings us to the 1980s. The star of the show here is, for me, Dr. Pepper. It's just a slight change from the 70s logo in lettering, just sharper edges, but it does so much for it. Looks good, modern, classic, and I have no idea why they didn't keep this. Clearly, they could not decide on either burgundy or red, so they went with both, and that's fine. Looks great. I'm sure they'll find a way to ruin it. And Pepsi's logo was... it's nearly perfect. It's so close. The big change is the letters. These Pepsi letters. These are the best Pepsi letters. This S, this E, it's perfect. Again, I don't really care that much for the side colors, but I can live with it. It's fine. But what ruins this is that trademark sign. I hate trademark signs on my logos. I truly do. Yes, they have popped up many times before this, but usually it would be written out on a ribbon, out of sight, out of mind. Right here, it is slapped in the center. It's so distracting. It's awful. You ruined it. Not as bad as Coke ruined it, though. Look, I'm not gonna go in depth on new Coke. This story has been discussed many times. They changed the formula, something they've done, actually, a few times, right? But they made it really public, and they changed the branding, and people revolted. And then after all this, old Coke came back. Coca-Cola Classic sales skyrocketed. People realized how much they missed Coca-Cola. Was this a marketing ploy? Who knows? Not the point. What matters is the logo. Coca-Cola, for a brief time, just became Coke. And that's a bad thing. The Coke logo had already been introduced with Diet Coke. And most people don't refer to Coca-Cola as Coca-Cola in everyday conversation, and rebranding to simply Coke probably seemed like the right move. But yeah, Coke didn't pull this one off and went back to the old logo pretty quickly. Kind of. You'd either have Coke in subtitles or you'd have Classic at the bottom, which is just so... I hate it. Okay, so 1980s Diet Pepsi, amazing logo. Probably one of my favorites. But even this can't compare quite to the Pepsi Cool cans, which are very cool, but also a bit controversial. If you take this neon design and you stack it on another Pepsi, it spells sex. But design-wise, this Pepsi logo is probably my favorite take on the Pepsi logo. This brings us to the 1990s. Dr. Pepper ruins their logo. It is a slight change from the 80s, but a few details do just straight up ruin this. Why do you need to connect those gaps? These gaps, right there, right there. It takes something away. It feels unnecessary. In fact, around this point, a lot of unnecessary details start popping up in logos. Things are getting a little bit more complicated than they need to be because designers are getting computers and Photoshop. Even Pepsi, which had a great looking logo, decided to throw it all out for this. I get it. A lot of you probably have a ton of nostalgia for this. I have nostalgia for this, but think about it. They took this and they made it slanted to give the impression of movement. Now, I will give them credit for having just 2 colors instead of 3, but it comes at the cost of having a giant red accents on the side for seemingly no reason. And then they shrink the bottle cap or the globe, whatever they want to call it, and it just feels so unbalanced. Mountain Dew, on the other hand, had a change for the better, I feel. It was subtle, but by making these round edges sharp, it gives the whole drink a different vibe, one they would probably take a bit too far. Dr. Pepper is a mixed bag. I love this background. This painted 90s jazz solo cup aesthetic always gets a win from me. The P returns to the 80s style. That's a good thing, but everything else gets a bit more bland. I assume this is due to legibility concerns, but I'm sorry, it just means that Dr. Pepper becomes less and less interesting as a look. Diet Coke. Okay, so at first Diet Coke inspired Coke, and then Coke inspired Diet Coke. The Coke remains the same basic text, but the Diet gets an all cursive handwritten scribbly thing, and I like it. So designers were getting much more comfortable with computers, and computers were getting more powerful, and designs were getting too complicated. Don't get me wrong, a lot of nostalgia. One of my favorites is Diet Coke, which introduces this very 90s looking cup and some bubbles. Interesting drop shadow gives it some depth, but it doesn't go too overboard. Mountain Dew gets a look that I think many recognize as that peak gamer drink look. Looks very sharp. Look how the W and M are opposites of each other. It's like poetry, it rhymes. But Pepsi, Oh, Pepsi. In 1998, Pepsi decided to have a big 100th anniversary birthday bash with a major redesign to celebrate it. I expect most of you watching this remember this design vividly. Everything from vending machines to trucks to boxes, it was all adorned with this. Not just a logo, but a whole package. It's interesting to think that this blue color that we associate so much with the Pepsi brand today wasn't really all that important until nearly the 21st century. The lettering is kind of odd, it's inverted, it's colorless, and this is to just allow that background to stand out more, or for it to stand out more on the background. What really bothers me though is the globe. We went from the old bottle cap, we went to the flattened design, we got the sphere, we got a ball now with lighting and shadows and a gradient, and it's plopped haphazardly to the side of the letters. At least the trademark is off to the side. Mountain Dew's logo would get a circular redesign, which is fine. Not great, old one's better. Dr. Pepper would follow with its own circular redesign, which is just straight up terrible. Okay, so when you have a logo with the letters established in 1800 or whatever, you generally want to have a traditional old-timey logo. Old-looking logos combined with these numbers, it gives a sense of familiarity and trust. This doesn't work if you try to couple the traditional old-time vibes with modern hip swirls and swoops. You got, you know, these flowing, cursive, handwritten letters next to a Sonic the Hedgehog looking P over here. Okay, so this is the Pepsi logo from 2006 to 2008, and I despise this. Why do we have water droplets falling off of it? Why is it's just too much, and it starts to lose all of the charm along the way. You know what this reminds me of? With the 3D, you know, blue, white, and red, and it's wet, and it's a globe. It's Sherwin-Williams, the paint company. Every time I look at this, every time I drink my Pepsi, I think I'm drinking paint. Thank you, Pepsi. Thank you. When I was a kid, I remember thinking that the 2000s will never be looked back on fondly because of these design decisions that so many companies had. I thought, you know, this doesn't have a style that people will be nostalgic for. We gotta return to simpler logos. That's what I thought. And I got my wish. A monkey paw style wish. This was Pepsi's redesign for 2008. Soda enters minimalism. At first, when I was a kid, when I first saw this, I thought it looked great. I thought it looked amazing. I thought it looked so cool. It's the future. This is a futuristic looking Pepsi for the futuristic year of 2008. And look, it's not even that minimal, right? The E has a nice wave. The globe is globy. The all undercase letters probably seems a bit too trendy, but actually this is a throwback to the 1970s Diet Pepsi logo, which honestly looks pretty good. At least here in the United States, Mountain Dew was renamed to MTN Dew in 2009. So Mountain Dew as a brand has had an identity crisis for a little bit there. It started out kind of as hillbilly moonshine drink, you know? And then it became sort of, I don't know, do we want to call this the X Games sort of drink? It's like Red Bull before Red Bull, and then it became gamer fuel. And I imagine that the reason it's called MTN Dew here in the United States is because it's like leet speak. By 2015, Dr. Pepper got a new minimalistic design. It's just the old design without the extra fancy stuff. It's still not great, but without the circular frills and nonsense over here, it's at least acceptable. You know, the 2010s were a pretty slow time for redesigns. Just a few minor changes here and there. Until 2023, Pepsi redesigned its logo to this. It was called a throwback by many, but it really isn't. The closest it gets to anything is that briefly lived 1960s logo that was only occasionally used. But even then, it's not identical to that. I mean, for a company like Pepsi that's always trying to be ahead of the curve, that's trying to be in the future, this feels like they're going backwards, you know? And if you were trying to play to nostalgia, why not go back to this logo or this one? And the reason for this is probably because it's not a throwback. You cannot get something as recognizable as the Nike swoosh or the Apple if you change your logo every 20 years. That recognition has to be so much more valuable than just appealing to the youth that might not even care about your redesign anyway. So honestly, I think this logo is gonna stick around for a long time. And I don't love it. I wish they would have used the dark blue for the lettering. I think that alone would have changed. It would have made it a good logo. It would have made it a very good logo. But using the black text, I don't know. I didn't love it in the 60s when I was not alive, and I don't love it now. Okay, so Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Coca-Cola, these are not the only soft drinks, obviously. It's just that so many other drinks are not quite as concerned about image or marketing or all that stuff. But let's still look at some other logos. Before Mug Root Beer was Mug, it wasn't Mug. What a surprise. But that famous Mug dog has only been around for 20 years. Barks Root Beer has changed a few times, but the letters remain mostly the same. And by the way, I love the slogan for this drink. It's good. 7-Up is one of the most interesting to me in terms of logos because it constantly wavers between being really good and really bad, and really, really bad. 1930 is really good. This is really bad. 1931, they had this logo, which is pretty close to what they use today. From the late 40s to the late 60s, 7-Up had claimed red as its color. Probably not a great move with all the competition. They moved to green, but couldn't fully give up on that red color. Not only is this because of nostalgia in 30 years of branding, but also probably color theory. On a color wheel, red and green, not always exact opposites, but that's because you're looking at the wrong color wheel. I'm not going to get into that today, but these contrast well. The 70s logo with dots is great, except for this. Why is that not a dot? 1980s, we get basically the modern look, just not necessarily the right colors. Perfect. Look, that blue drop shadow, it works so well. Red, green, and blue. And everything after this was awful. A 3D ball having lighting, shadows. It doesn't work for me. The logo is so simple. It's a 7 and an up and you ruined it. The new logo, which seems to be in just Europe right now, is actually really good, and I hope we get this in the States. Speaking of another lemon limey drink, Sprite. The early 60s logo is amazing. Would it be a bit dated today? I don't care. I don't care. It's great. Color choice, great for a lemon lime drink. The move to red and green, not so great. This abstract icon, a Sprite if you will, sadly would disappear by the mid-70s. A lot of logos went all white around this time to contrast with these incredibly colorful cans. So judging them just on how the PNGs of the logos look is really unfair. But after this, the Sprite logo is just awful. It is not iconic. They cannot decide whether to keep the lemon and lime or take it away, and you don't have a brand or an image by that point. But none of this is as bad as Sierra Mist. Okay, so for context, Sprite is owned by the Coca-Cola company, and 7-Up is owned by Dr. Pepper. Sierra Mist is PepsiCo's attempt to compete. The first logo was not bad, but by 2001, I do think Sierra Mist was onto something. Yes, it's a little bit busy, but it combines this 90s and 60s aesthetic into a weird but unmistakable look. Sierra Mist is the mist of a mountain. That mountain is important, should probably keep it. Something that they did in the next significantly inferior logo. Disgusting. Having the word mist spelled with actual mist is such a bad idea. This logo didn't even last a single year. We get yet another redesign that lasts only 3 years, and then yet another one. Look, I've talked about how Pepsi can't become quite the icon that Coke is, because if you change your logo every few years, people can't, they can't keep up. But come on, Sierra Mist is getting rebranded over and over and over again, and any fans of the stuff would likely forget it existed. They tried renaming it to Mist Twist, which did not work, and then they went back to Sierra Mist for a few more years with another logo redesign before scrapping it. Starry is not Sierra Mist. It's a different lemon lime drink altogether. Sierra Mist just died. because they couldn't come up with a good logo. Okay, so finally, I want to end on Coca-Cola's attempt at making a Dr. Pepper competitor. Dr. Pepper is a weird drink. It's not quite a cola. It's not quite a root beer. In fact, I don't think anybody really knows what it is. I think people call it a pepper drink. I don't know what that means. Coke wanted a piece of the pepper action, so they created Peppo until Dr. Pepper sued them. And then they changed it to Mr. Pibb. They tested it out in the home territory of Dr. Pepper, Texas, and people were probably fine with it. Look, Mr. Pibb is a good name. It's probably the best soda name, but there is a brief time here where Mr. Pibb has the greatest logo of any soda. Mr. Pibb, put it in your head. I honestly believe that if this logo had stuck around, Mr. Pibb would be remembered so fondly. Sadly, they did not stick with this and their incredible mascot, and we got Pibb Extra instead. So yeah, that is my opinions and thoughts on soft drink logos. If you have opinions and thoughts on soft drink logos, you can comment below. I should probably change my own channel's logo at some point, right? Maybe I'll change it to this. Again, huge thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Make sure you click that link in the description, go sign up, and get an extra 3 months for free.